Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. HTM here, and in this video, we are talking about ESO's next major update. This is called Update 33, and it's coming to the Elder Scrolls Online in March to go along with the Ascending Tide DLC. This is a base game update that affects all players regardless of what DLCs you own, and this update is going to include some major combat changes that will without a doubt affect your build. I'll be breaking down all the major changes that you need to know so that you can start preparing your build right now for this major update. So let's jump right into it. So what combat changes are coming in ESO Update 33 that will change your build? Well, there are several, but the main one that you need to know about is dynamic stat scaling being added to most skills in the game. Dynamic stat scaling is basically taking an ability and letting it increase in damage or healing efficiency based on your build's highest offensive stats. Those stat options are either weapon damage combined with stamina or spell damage combined with magicka. So what does this look like in the game? Well, some of you may have already experienced this with a small subset of abilities that ZeniMax has tested out in the past. One example is Templar's Ritual of Retribution skill, which does AoE magic damage and has said on the tooltip, this ability scales with your highest offensive stats. So for several patches now, both magicka and stamina Templar builds have used this skill for damage or for healing. This is a perfect example of a skill that dynamically scales with your stats. Other abilities that have already had this effect include Soul Trap from the Soul Magic skill line, and recently Twisting Path from the Nightblade's Shadow skill line, and Flame Lash from the Dragon Knight class. And the great thing about all of these skills is that they can be used on both stamina and magicka builds equally well, and this can basically make for more options and more diverse playstyles in ESO, which is great. So the big change coming in Update 33 in just a few weeks from now is that nearly every single skill in the game is being converted to this dynamic stat scaling system, just like Twisting Path, just like Flame Lash and Ritual of Retribution, which we just talked about. This is literally hundreds of skills that can now be effectively used on any build in the game, whether you have a stamina build, a magicka build, or even a hybrid setup. We're talking about class skills like Sorcerer's Mage's Wrath, for example, or weapon skills like the dual-wield Steel Tornado skill, even guild skills like Degeneration from the Mage's Guild, and yes, even PvP skills like Resolving Vigor, because this will work for both damage-focused and healing-focused abilities. Alright, so I want to demonstrate kind of how this works. I'm currently logged into the PTS. We're testing out Update 33, and I'm on my Stamina Nightblade bow build here, kind of testing different hybrid options. So check out my stats first. Pretty typical for like a stamina build. I've got 15k magicka, 23k health, and 30k stamina. And then also take a look at my weapon damage. Unbuffed, about 3,300 weapon damage. Okay, so those are the basic stats. Pretty typical like stamina build, right? So let's check out a skill that has both a stamina and a magicka morph. This is going to be Assassin's Blade. And the two morph options are Killer's Blade and Impale. So Killer's Blade, stamina skill, it does 4,100 about disease damage. Impale is the magicka morph, is doing 4,100 magic damage. So you can see these are the same currently. Now, with Update 33, since we now have dynamic stat scaling, if I increase either my weapon damage or my stamina, which are my highest offensive stats, should be able to then increase the damage of either of those morphs equally. So let's use a potion here. This is my Alliance War potion. This only gives me major brutality and savagery. Does not give me spell damage. You can see this is only going to give me weapon damage because potions have not changed. Go ahead and use that, and you can see I'm up to 3,800 weapon damage. Let's go ahead and check our morphs again. Killer's Blade went up to 4,500 damage, and Impale also went up to 4,500 damage. So they both increased. They're increasing with our highest offensive stats. Now I could increase this even more by increasing my stamina, right? So if I change my food here and use blue food, so now I have about 32,000 max stamina, more stamina. Let me just wait so I can refresh my potion also, and we should get even more damage on both morphs. Let's check it out. So now I have 4,600 damage on Killer's Blade and 4,600 damage on Impale. Exactly the same amount of damage because, again, all my offensive skills and my healing skills now scale up with my highest offensive stats. In this case, stamina and weapon damage. So does this mean that every build in the game is now going to be a hybrid build? Well, I think it depends on how you define hybrid builds in ESO. For example, on this bow Nightblade that I've been showing you, I have about 3 Magicka abilities. I have a Magicka-based dot, I have my Magicka Execute Impale, which I showed you earlier, and I have a Magicka buff. I think I could even throw in another Magicka dot like Twisting Path, or I could use the Shade Pet. So yes, I think you could call this a hybrid build technically, but if we want to be more clear, we might say it's a stamina-focused hybrid, or it's a single-stat hybrid. This reflects the idea that we have much more stamina on this build than Magicka, and our primary offensive stats are going to be weapon damage combined with our stamina pool. To me, this is pretty different than the usual hybrid-style builds that I've created on this channel in the past. Those are what I would call more a traditional hybrid build, or a split-stat hybrid build. An example of this would be my recent hybrid Necromancer build. This has an equal amount of max stamina and max Magicka, and for years this has been the preferred way to play a hybrid build in ESO, because you could use both Magicka and stamina skills fairly equally, and you wouldn't have to worry so much about running out of resources, or if you did run out of one resource, let's say you ran out of stamina, you could just switch to your other resource and start using Magicka skills until that stamina then recovered back. This is one of my favorite playstyles in the game because it allows you to come up with some truly unique combinations of skills, but it always had the major downside of you just do less damage and you have less healing than a more optimal stamina or Magicka focused build. That's because when you split your stats in ESO like I've done with these past hybrid setups, your abilities have a smaller stamina or a smaller Magicka pool to use as a resource, and therefore they do less damage or they do less healing. That's because, again, abilities in ESO currently increase in effectiveness based on equations that combine both your resource pool and your damage stat, which is a little weird, honestly, but that's just how it works. So in Update 33, the ability for us to create single-stat hybrid builds, this is a major evolution in theory crafting. That's because a single-stat hybrid build will do exactly the same amount of damage and the same amount of healing as a pure stamina or a pure Magicka build. In fact, if you build it right, a single-stat hybrid like this will be able to both compete in endgame content and bring new options to endgame builds. The only downside here to this new kind of build is going to be resource management, and specifically managing that lower secondary resource. Going back to my stamina-focused Nightblade hybrid example that I just showed you, I have about 30k stamina, as you saw, as my main resource, and then I had about 15k Magicka, that's my secondary resource. Now remember, I can now cast any Magicka skill I want in Update 33, and it will now be as powerful as a stamina skill, but my limited Magicka resource pool means I need to be more selective about which skills I use, because I'm going to run out of Magicka much faster on this type of build than I will run out of stamina. In this example build, I'm using Impale as a Magicka Execute. This is a lot of fun. It works really well on a bow setup because it's a true ranged execute. I don't have to get in melee range to use Killer's Blade anymore. But the challenging part is I can only cast Impale about 8 to maybe 10 times before completely running out of Magicka. Now in some fights, this is completely fine. 8 casts is all I need and the fight's over. Or for longer fights, I can always use a Magicka Potion if I need to. Or I can maybe weave in some other stamina abilities to kind of lower my overall Magicka drain. So to be clear, Update 33 is going to be awesome for theory crafting new builds like this, but it's more about adding a few extra skills into the mix where it makes the most sense. The fact that builds still have a limited amount of resources becomes a built-in balancing factor, which I actually like this a lot. Yes, you will have access to many, many more skills this patch, and you can use them at full power for the first time ever. It's almost like getting a completely new skill line, but you need to be strategic because everything has a cost to balance. Here's how I think you could make this work better for your build. You're going to want to pick abilities from your secondary resource that have long durations or that you can use more sporadically in a fight. A great way to do this is to pick some dot skills, which only need to be cast maybe every 10 to 15 seconds, or maybe an execute ability which you only need to cast at the very end of a fight. This works really well in my testing so far. It opens up tons of build options, and it's just a really fun way to play. What's more difficult, though, is trying to use a spammable skill from that secondary resource. For example, let's say you are running a Stamina Templar, you have about 30k stamina, you have 15k magicka. You won't necessarily be able to use Puncturing Sweep as your main spammable DPS skill for very long, because if you try, you're going to run out of magicka in about 2 rotations, and then you can't use your main spammable ability anymore. So depending on the skill, there might be some ways around this, especially if your rotation has fewer casts of that spammable skill, but I'd still recommend for Update 33 that your spammable skill uses your main resource pool as a general rule. For everything else, including dots, including buffs, heals, even some executes like we talked about, you now have the choice. You can use stamina, you can use a magicka skill, whatever works best for you and your build. Experiment here, but don't overdo it. Probably 3 to 4 skills at max should come from your secondary resource, with everything else coming from your main stat. So I hope that clears things up in terms of dynamic stat scaling in Update 33. There are other changes happening to the base game, more combat changes, buff changes, but this is by far the biggest change that you need to watch out for in this update. If you're watching this now before Update 33 drops, start looking at your secondary morphs right now. You might want to start leveling those up so that you're ready to test out those new builds when this update drops. And if you're struggling with this idea, I've also created an article over on our website, that's hacktheminotaur.com, which explains dynamic scaling in more detail with more examples. And I even have a list of damage and healing skills for each class there, so you can see specifically what your best options will be in Update 33 and beyond. The link for that will be in the description and the pinned comment down below. If you guys found this video helpful today, as always, please do me a favor and crush that like button so that YouTube shares this video out with as many other ESO players as possible. If you'd like to support the channel further, we also have a great membership program hosted here on YouTube. Our members right now actually have early access to the complete hybrid Nightblade Archer build that you're actually watching right now. Tons more perks for members are available as well, so if that sounds good to you, just click on that join button down below for more information. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. Hope you're doing well, stay safe out there, and I will see you around in the next video.